Hey everyone. So, as we continue to think about the role that empires have played in our modern world, we're going to talk today about a particular era that is extremely important to the development of where we live, and that is the age of exploration. When we talk about the age of exploration, we're talking about an era of European global exploration between the 15th century and the 17th century, so the 1400s to the 1600s. It has in the past been called the Age of Discovery because it was discovering lands that the Europeans did not know about, but discovery sometimes gives it a word that isn't quite correct because a lot of people live there, and so they couldn't possibly have discovered this place. They were not the first ones to find it. And so this is a period of extensive overseas exploration and colonization, especially within the Americas at this time. And this is marked by technological advances and economic motivations that are going to lead to cultural, biological, and economic exchanges. So in terms of causes, we come out of the mid 1400s where several things have happened, and this is going to lead to a spark that is going to lead eventually to the finding of the Americas by Europeans. And so the first of these is a desire for new trade routes to Asia, followed by Renaissance spirit of curiosity and adventure that's going on. You also have advancements that are taking place technologically in terms of how ships are being built and how good of navigators they are as well, as far as individuals. And then there's also competition going on among different European nations, which when we talked about this in the innovation unit, competition oftentimes breeds furthering of development because you're trying to get better than the other person, and that's going to lead to some changes going on. There's also a desire to spread Christianity as well, and economic motivations, of course, which always seem to be not far behind any other motivations that someone has. So in terms of thinking about the technological advancements, there's a couple things that are going on that are going to lead to these advancements. For one, there are improved ship designs like caravels. There's also been advancements in cartography or map making that are going on. And on top of it, you also have new navigational tools that are going to allow people to travel further and faster than ever before. And this includes the astrolabe, so it measures the altitude and position of the stars in order to aid in navigation. You also have the compass, which we know about and a lot of us still use to this day, which can tell you direction. And then a quadrant, which gave a better understanding of winds and currents and the ability to sail through these winds and currents and use them to your advantage. Now, in terms of the goals of the age of exploration, you have a desire to find new trade routes to Asia. The Ottoman Empire at this time is blocking access to travel eastward in order to find Asia, and so Europeans decide that they have to go either around the tip of Africa over to Asia, or they have to decide to go west. You also have the discovery of new sources of gold and silver in the Americas, the spread of Christianity and finding people who do not yet know the word of Christianity to spread to them and to convert people, either by force or by choice, and then to also gain power and prestige. And so all of these things are going to reshape global connections and economies. But if we're thinking about these goals, really it comes down to three things: God, gold, and glory. And that is going to drive the impacts of reshaping these global connections and economies as well. So in terms of the major countries that are involved at this time, we have Spain and Portugal, who are among the first to begin traveling these great distances, and then England and France as well. And in a lot of ways, these are the four strongest countries, particularly in Western Europe. So in terms of looking at some of the Portuguese explorers and looking at some of the famous figures from each of these countries, the first of them is, in terms of Portugal, Prince Henry the Navigator. And this is someone who is actually a prince. And so he wields a lot of power within Portugal. But he becomes Prince Henry the Navigator because he was so excellent in terms of his navigational knowledge. He establishes a navigation school in terms of ship navigation in Sagres, and he also ends up sponsoring a lot of the early Portuguese expeditions. And so his power within Portuguese society is important in terms of sparking some of these changes. But you also have Bartholomew Diaz. He is the first European to sail around the southern tip of Africa. And then Vasco da Gama, a very famous explorer who was the first to reach India by sea and established a trade route between Portugal and India, which had stops along the way in Africa as well. So in terms of the Spanish explorers, you have Christopher Columbus, who obviously becomes very famous and infamous for discovering the Americas for most of Europe. The Vikings had found it, but it was not necessarily well known at that point. And he was an Italian explorer that was sailing for Spain because he could be sponsored by the Spanish, who were trying to find new ways to extract wealth. And because he tried to sail west to India and to find a new trade route, he ends up becoming the first European to reach the Americas in quite a long time. Now, you also have Ferdinand Magellan during this time as well. He ends up becoming the first person who's able to sail all around the globe, or at least be part of that first voyage and lead it. And then you also have Hernan Cortez. And we talked about Hernan Cortez during the talks about the empires in America, because through his explorations, he conquers the mighty Aztec Empire in Mexico, both through violence and through the disease that was being brought. So in terms of thinking about how the age of exploration is going for so many within Europe, we can see in this picture a lot of the motivations right here. So Christopher Columbus is in red, right in the middle. He's exposing that glory part of the god Golden Glory. We also see a man, if we're looking to our left of Christopher Columbus, who is holding up a cross, so part of that god portion. And then so many of the other people are looking for riches. And so that's where that gold comes in. All right, so we've talked about Spanish and Portuguese explorers, but we also need to think about some of the French and English explorers who are going to become even more important moving forward. So in the late 1400s, you have John Cabot, who was another Italian who was exploring for another country in terms of England this time. And he ends up, after Christopher Columbus, exploring the North American coast. And this sort of prompts England to invest more and more in terms of exploring the Americas. You also have Jacques Cartier for the French, and he ends up claiming Canada for France. So if you think about places like Quebec and Montreal, they still speak French to this day, and it's because of the work of Jacques Cartier. And then you also have another English explorer, Sir Francis Drake, an English explorer and privateer, so he was not always funded by the English government, but he is the second person to circumnavigate the globe. All right, so looking at some of the political effects of this era of the Age of Exploration, you have the establishment of new colonial empires. You also have a shift in global power dynamics that are going on as well. and the creation of new political alliances and rivalries. You also have a development of new forms of governance in the colonies, where you have these European nations creating colonies for the first time, and the development of democracy in some parts of that, but also some of the other forms of political representative government or non-representative government that we saw in the Latin American revolutions. And then also conflicts between different European powers over territories within the Americas. And so all of this is going to lead to a lot of different clashes, but a lot of different forms of power for the Europeans. Now, in terms of economic effects, you have the establishment of new trade routes, the growth of mercantilism, which, as we talked about, was the dominant form of economy, where the European power was setting up colonies that they would take raw materials from, they would take them back to their country, make goods out of them, and sell it back to the people that they had taken the resources from. And so all of this leads to an increase in wealth for European nations because mercantilism is designed to benefit the European nation and not the colony itself. You also have the development of new industries and markets, and the beginning of this transatlantic slave trade as well, unfortunately. As these quote-unquote new lands were taken over, the use of the slave trade was being used more and more in order to aid in both free labor and also the development of this land. On top of that, you also have the exploitation of natural resources in these new territories. Like I said, with mercantilism, these European nations are stealing these resources, even though they, I guess, have conquered these lands. They are taking these from these people and selling it back to them as something else. All right, so we talked about political, we talked about economic, here's social and cultural. So there is a cultural exchange that ends up taking place between Europe and other continents. You have a spread of ideas. You have a spread of Christianity to new regions. But you also have a displacement and a decimation of the indigenous populations, both due to the disease and the violence that was brought by Europeans to these places in the Americas, but also because of a suppression that's going on within these areas that are leading to the European language, the European customs becoming the dominant one by force. And on top of that, you also have an introduction of new foods and plants and animals to different regions. And we'll talk about that more as we move forward here. And that new exchange of plants and animals and cultural and technology and diseases is named the Columbian Exchange. And it's named after Christopher Columbus, and it occurs between the New and the Old Worlds. And so you have this significant impact on ecology, so the types of plants and animals that could live here and how that affects other things within the environment, and then also agriculture and culture globally as well. And so the long-term effects of this age of exploration is a lot. You have globalization of trade and culture, where ideas are being spread further and faster than ever before. You have demographic changes due to migration and disease, where millions of indigenous peoples within the Americas are unfortunately losing their lives because of this disease. You have environmental changes and species introduction, like, for instance, horses being on the American continent for the first time, or potatoes going back to Europe for the first time. And then scientific advancements in geography and natural sciences, as well as the beginning of European global dominance, where Europe becomes really the dominant continent for the first time in the history of the world. And on top of that, you also have cultural and linguistic influences worldwide, where suddenly places in the Americas are speaking English and Spanish and Portuguese that would have never been exposed to those languages before. All right, well, at this point, this is it for notes for today. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right, have a great day.